She slid the velvet box across the table like it was nothing. Sentimental value, the lawyer said, while Brooke smirked in her cream-colored suit, Mom's pearls gleaming at her throat, the same pearls Mom promised me at 12. Then Brooke said it. You can visit the garden once I finish renovating, if you still want a connection. She'd taken everything, the house, the jewelry, even my mother's memory, rewritten like I was never her daughter at all. But what she didn't know was that Mom had stitched the truth into something Brooke would never touch. The page she didn't know existed, it was already in my pocket, and I was done staying quiet. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Jenna Whitmore, and I'm 35 years old. I live in a cozy one-bedroom apartment surrounded by carefully preserved pieces of my mother's life. My older sister Brooke Whitmore Richards always commanded every room she entered, while I preferred the quiet corners with a book. Mom understood that about me. When she got sick, I was the one who moved back home to care for her, not my Instagram perfect sister who only showed up for carefully curated photo opportunities. I trace my fingers along Mom's favorite quilt now, feeling the slight ridge where the fabric feels different. My shoulders relax, knowing what's hidden beneath those deliberate stitches. Brooke may have the lawyers and the connections, but Mom left me something far more valuable than she realizes. But let me start from the beginning. Have you ever walked into your childhood home and felt like you were stepping into a time capsule? That's exactly how it felt when I moved back in to care for Mom. Every familiar creak of the hardwood floors, every faded mark on the wallpaper where our growth charts used to hang, it all whispered memories I thought I'd packed away years ago. The day I arrived with my hastily packed suitcases, Mom was sitting in her favorite armchair by the bay window, wrapped in that old quilt she'd made decades ago. The afternoon sun caught the silver in her hair, making her look almost ethereal. For a moment, I could almost pretend she wasn't sick. Almost. "Jenna, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm but weaker than I remembered. "You didn't have to give up your job for this. But I had to. The elementary school library could find another coordinator. Mom needed me, even if she wouldn't admit it. I remember the smell of chicken soup simmering on the stove, her recipe that I'd started making that morning. Someone has to make sure you don't try reorganizing the attic again," I teased, and her laugh, though soft, filled the room like it always had. Brooke swept in 2 days later, her designer heels clicking against the floor like she was walking a runway. She brought a professional photographer with her. "For the family archive," she claimed. I watched from the kitchen doorway as she arranged Mom's pillows, fixed her hair, and posed beside her with practiced concern. "Oh, Mom," she cooed, loud enough for the camera. "I wish I could stay longer, but Charles has that charity gala in the Hamptons this weekend." She shot me a look that dared me to comment on her priorities. I bit my tongue and counted the pills for Mom's evening dose instead. The next few months became a blur of medication schedules, doctor's appointments, and long nights holding Mom's hand through fever spikes. You know those quiet hours just before dawn, when the world feels suspended between yesterday and tomorrow? That's when Mom would tell me stories about her childhood, about the dreams she had before life took different turns. Sometimes she'd drift off mid-sentence, and I'd sit there, memorizing the feeling of her fingers intertwined with mine. Brooke made her second appearance 3 weeks before the end. This time she brought a film crew from her lifestyle blog. "I'm doing a special series on family caregiving," she announced, positioning herself at Mom's bedside like she belonged there. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. That night, after the cameras left and Brooke retreated to her hotel, "The house is just too depressing to sleep in," she'd said. Mom had one of her clearest moments in weeks. She gripped my hand with surprising strength, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Don't let her erase what matters," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Promise me, Jenna." I promised, even though I didn't understand. What could Brooke erase? Mom's presence was woven into every inch of this house, from the garden she'd tended to the books she'd collected. Even then, something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. Mom slipped away 3 days later, in the soft gray light of early morning. Brooke didn't make it back in time. I sat alone with Mom, holding her hand until the hospice nurse gently told me it was time to let go. The funeral passed in a haze of black dresses and casseroles. Brooke gave a beautiful eulogy about Mother's strength and grace, about family bonds and cherished memories. Then she vanished, probably back to her perfect life and her perfect mansion with her perfect husband. I spent the next week packing up the house, each object a decision I wasn't ready to make. Keep, donate, store. Mom's reading glasses still sat on her nightstand, a bookmark peeking out from her last novel. Her gardening gloves hung by the back door, caked with dried soil from her final attempt to tend her roses. Every night, I'd curl up in her chair, wrapped in that old quilt, and try to make sense of her last words to me. Don't let her erase what matters. The phrase echoed in my head as I boxed up photo albums, sorted through file cabinets, and wrapped her collection of antique teacups in newspaper. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp white envelope with gold-embossed legal letterhead. My hands trembled as I opened it. Funny how official correspondence always makes your stomach drop, isn't it? The formal summons to the reading of Mom's will was set for Thursday at 2 p.m. sharp. I spent the next 2 days trying to keep busy, but my mind kept circling back to Mom's last words. The morning of the reading, I stood in front of my closet, staring at my options. Nothing felt right. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences back when I was still working at the elementary school library. The law office occupied the entire top floor of the tallest building downtown. You know those places, all gleaming wood and leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. The receptionist led me to a conference room where sunshine streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, making me feel exposed and small. I was early, of course, always the punctual one, that's me. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, but my stomach was too knotted to accept anything stronger than water. I sat there, fidgeting with my mother's silver bracelet, the one she'd given me on my 30th birthday, and tried to steady my breathing. At exactly 2 p.m., the door swung open. Brooke swept in like she owned the place, wearing a cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Behind her strode a man in an expensive charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase that matched his shoes. "Oh, Jenna," Brooke said, as if suddenly remembering I existed. "I didn't realize you'd be here already." Her voice carried that familiar note of condescension, the one that always made me feel about 10 years old. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, according to his introduction, settled into the chair at the head of the table. He pulled out a stack of documents with practiced efficiency, laying them out like cards in a high-stakes game. "Ladies," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble, "we're here for the reading of Eleanor Whitmore's last will and testament." He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and began to read. My heart stopped as the words washed over me. The house, to Brooke. Mom's savings account, to Brooke. The antique jewelry collection that had been in our family for generations, to Brooke. The garden property, the car, even Mom's personal items, all to Brooke. "There is one specific bequest for Jenna," Mr. Harrison said, sliding a small velvet box across the table. "Your mother wanted you to have her music box, for sentimental value." The room started spinning. I stared at the little box, the one that had sat on Mom's dresser when we were kids, playing the same tinny melody over and over. Was this some kind of joke? "Mom wanted things done right," Brooke said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She knew I'd preserve her legacy properly. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "This can't be," I started, but my voice cracked. "Mom wouldn't—" "Everything's already filed," Mr. Harrison interrupted, closing his briefcase with a decisive click. "This meeting is just a formality. The probate process has begun." I looked at Brooke, really looked at her. She met my gaze with cool detachment, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. In that moment, I saw what Mom had always tried to protect me from, the calculated ruthlessness behind my sister's polished facade. "We should celebrate," Brooke announced, standing up. "I'm thinking of turning the garden into a meditation space. Something Instagram-worthy, you know?" She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You can visit sometime if you'd like, once the renovations are done." Mr. Harrison gathered his things, efficiently stacking papers and tucking them away. The meeting was over. Just like that. 35 years of being Mom's daughter, reduced to a small music box and an invitation to visit my childhood home once my sister was done, erasing every trace of our mother's touch. I clutched the velvet box to my chest, my knuckles white with tension. The room felt airless, like all the oxygen had been sucked out along with my inheritance. Brooke's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she headed for the door, her victory complete. The paperwork will be filed with the court by end of business today, Mr. Harrison said, not even looking up from his briefcase. Just a formality. I couldn't stay in that sterile law office another second. I drove home. To Mom's house, I mean. It would always be Mom's house to me, no matter what Brooke's paperwork said. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into the driveway, casting long shadows through the oak trees Mom had planted when we were kids. My hands shook as I used my key, probably for the last time. The house was eerily quiet, most of the furniture already wrapped in moving blankets, ready for whatever gaudy makeover Brooke had planned. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, each step creaking in its familiar pattern. You know how some sounds just take you right back? The third step from the top always squeaked twice, like it was telling secrets. I collapsed onto the bare floor, pulling Mom's favorite quilt around my shoulders. The tears I'd been holding back all afternoon finally broke free. The quilt still smelled like her, that mix of lavender soap and Earl Grey tea that meant home and safety and everything I was about to lose. Everything important is stitched into this house, Mom used to say, usually while she was working on one of her quilting projects. She'd sit in her rocking chair by the window, carefully piecing together fragments of our lives, old baby clothes, Dad's favorite shirts after he passed, even bits of my high school graduation dress. I ran my fingers along the worn edges of the quilt, trying to hold on to something, anything, that felt real. That's when I felt it. A section of the border felt different, thicker. The stitching was irregular, done by hand instead of the precise machine work Mom usually used. My heart started racing. I turned the quilt over, examining the spot more closely. The stitches were definitely newer than the rest, and they were hiding something. I could feel it through the fabric, something flat and stiff. I hesitated for a moment. This quilt was one of the last things Mom had made. But something in my gut told me this wasn't random. Mom never did anything without a reason. I went to the sewing room, still untouched, thank God, and found her fabric scissors. My hands were trembling as I carefully snipped the stitches, one by one. The seam opened like a secret whispering to life. There, folded into a tight square, was a single sheet of paper. It had yellowed slightly with age, but the text was clear. My heart nearly stopped as I read the heading, Codicil to Last Will and Testament of Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. The date jumped out at me, exactly 1 month before Mom died. Below that was her signature, along with a notary's stamp and seal. But it was the content that made my whole world shift on its axis. I hereby modify my last will and testament to include the following specific bequests to my daughter, Jenna Marie Whitmore. The list was detailed and precise. Half of everything. The house, the savings, the family jewelry. But there was more. Things I didn't even know existed. A trust fund set up by our grandmother, the deed to a piece of land up north, and Mom's wedding ring that Brooke had already claimed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. This changed everything. But Brooke's lawyer had said the probate process had already started. How much time did I have? And more importantly, how had Brooke gotten her hands on a different will? I looked around the room, my childhood sanctuary that would soon be stripped bare if I didn't act fast. The late evening light caught Mom's silver hairbrush on the dresser, the one Brooke had already promised to some antique dealer. Next to it sat that stupid music box, its presence now feeling less like an insult and more like a clue. The paper in my hands was real, official, legal. Mom hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't chosen Brooke over me. She'd planned for this, hidden the truth where only I would find it, knowing I'd be the one to wrap myself in her quilt when everything fell apart. I carefully folded the codicil and slipped it into my pocket. The weight of it felt like armor against my leg. For the first time since that awful meeting, I could breathe properly. Mom's last whispered warning suddenly made perfect sense. Don't let her erase what matters. I barely slept that night. By 7 the next morning, I was already leaving a message for Richard Bennett, the attorney who'd helped Mom with her taxes for years. He'd always struck me as honest, the kind of lawyer who wore scuffed shoes and actually returned phone calls. "Come by at 9, he said when he called back. His voice had that careful tone adults use when they're trying not to spook a frightened child. You know those moments when time seems to move in slow motion? That's how it felt, sitting in his wood-paneled office, watching him examine the codicil through his reading glasses. The clock on his wall ticked so loudly I could feel each second in my teeth. "This is legitimate," he finally said, looking up. "Your mother's signature, proper notarization, specific bequests, it's all here." He leaned back, and his chair creaked. But we've got a serious problem, Jenna. My throat went dry. What kind of problem? Brooke's attorney filed for expedited probate 2 days ago. Judge Carson, your cousin Thomas, is presiding. He shuffled through some papers. They've already completed the initial hearing. Final certification is scheduled for... He checked his calendar. 10 days from now. The room started spinning. 10 days? That's all we have? To contest the will? Yes. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. And Jenna, Thomas has always been friendly with Brooke's crowd. Of course he had. Brooke had been maid of honor at his wedding, despite barely knowing his wife. She had that effect on people, always cultivating the right connections, always planning 3 moves ahead. What happens if we don't file in time? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Once probate is certified, it's nearly impossible to reverse. Everything would go to Brooke, exactly as her version of the will states. The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. Mom's last months, all those nights I'd held her hand, read to her, helped her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk. Meanwhile, Brooke had been posting carefully filtered Instagram photos of her brave mama's journey from 3 states away. We need to file today, Richard said, reaching for his phone. Right now. I'll have my assistant prepare the paperwork. 2 hours later, I stood at the courthouse counter, watching a clerk stamp our challenge documents. The sound echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. Or maybe that was just my heart pounding. Receipt copy, the clerk said, sliding a paper across the counter. Hearing date will be assigned within 48 hours. I tucked the receipt into my purse with shaking hands. 10 days. Everything would be decided in 10 days. That's when I saw it. A huge poster mounted on an easel near the courthouse entrance. My sister's perfect face smiled down at me, every blonde hair in place, wearing the pearl necklace that should have been mine. Below her photo, elegant script announced, "The Margaret Whitmore Memorial Gala, celebrating a legacy of love and learning." My legs went weak. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. The date on the poster was in 8 days, 2 days before the probate deadline. The venue was the Crystal Ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, where all the old money families held their charity events. Of course, Brooke would do this now. She was building her narrative, cementing her position as the grieving daughter carrying on our mother's legacy. I could already picture it. Brooke at the podium, dabbing artfully at her eyes while announcing some scholarship fund or library wing in Mom's name. The society pages would eat it up. By the time our challenge hit the courts, she'd be untouchable. The clerk was staring at me. "Are you okay, miss? You look a little pale." I forced myself to nod, but I couldn't tear my eyes from that poster. From Brooke's smile, the same smile she'd worn while handing me that worthless music box, like she was tossing scraps to a stray dog. Mom's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let her erase what matters." But how could I fight someone who'd already rewritten our entire history? Someone who had the judge in her pocket and the whole town ready to applaud her generosity? My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring everything you have on your mother's assets, every scrap of paper. We're going to need it all." I looked back at the poster one last time. Behind Brooke's polished smile, I could almost see the countdown clock ticking. 10 days to save my mother's legacy. 10 days to prove that the truth was worth more than a perfect performance. The next evening, I stood in the shadows across from the Riverside Hotel, watching valets park gleaming luxury cars while women in designer dresses floated up the marble steps. The October rain had stopped, but puddles still reflected the golden light spilling from the Crystal Ballroom's windows. I'd put on my best dress, a simple black cocktail number I'd worn to 3 different weddings. My hair was pulled back, minimal makeup applied, like I could somehow blend in with Brooke's crowd if I just stood up straight enough. You know that feeling when you're watching your own life turn into someone else's story? That's what hit me as I heard the familiar tinkling of Brooke's laugh drift down from the ballroom balcony. Through the tall windows, I could see her holding court near a massive portrait of Mom, one from at least 15 years ago, before the illness had stolen her glow. Brooke had positioned herself perfectly, so the photographer's flashes caught her profile against Mom's smile. Like mother, like daughter. At least that's what everyone would think. My feet felt heavy as I crossed the street. The doorman gave me a once-over, his expression neutral but evaluating. "Name?" "Jenna Whitmore." I tried to sound confident. "I'm Margaret Whitmore's daughter." He consulted his tablet, scrolling twice. I'm sorry, miss. You're not on the list. There must be some mistake. My voice cracked. I'm her daughter. The gala's in her name. Management's very strict about the guest list. He gestured to the next couple approaching. If you'd like to step aside. I backed away, cheeks burning. Through the windows, I could see Brooke ascending to the podium, pearls gleaming at her throat. Mom's pearls, the ones she'd promised would be mine since I was 12. Ladies and gentlemen, Brooke's voice carried through the open balcony doors. Tonight, we celebrate not just a mother's memory, but her legacy of giving. I pressed my hands against my stomach, trying to hold in the scream building there. A woman passing by shot me a concerned look. I must have looked unhinged, standing there in my department store dress, staring up at the windows like a ghost. The rain started again, soft at first. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from Brooke's performance. Mom always said that true wealth wasn't in what you kept, Brooke continued, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, but in what you gave away. The crowd murmured appreciatively. They didn't know that Mom had actually said that about love, not money. They didn't know how she'd roll her eyes at fancy charity galas, preferring to donate anonymously to the local women's shelter. The rain fell harder now, soaking through my thin dress. Still, I stood there, watching Brooke raise a champagne glass. To Margaret Whitmore, she declared. May her spirit of generosity live on through all of us. Through all of us. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. I turned away finally, my shoes squelching as I started the long walk home. I couldn't afford a cab. Not anymore. Not with my savings drained from Mom's medical bills while Brooke had been too busy to help. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched and shivering. The image of Brooke with that champagne glass, Mom's pearls catching the light, played on repeat in my mind. She'd won. She always won. I peeled off my wet clothes and curled up on the couch, pulling Mom's quilt around me, the one piece of her I still had. The codicil page lay on my coffee table, mocking me with its useless truth. What was the point of fighting? Brooke had the money, the connections, the perfect story. I was just the quiet sister who couldn't let go, making a scene outside fancy hotels in the rain. Maybe it would be easier to just disappear. Take the music box and whatever crumbs Brooke deigned to throw my way. Move to another city. Start over where no one knew about the sister who'd stolen everything, including our mother's memory. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of defeat settle over me like another wet blanket. The sound of distant thunder mixed with echoes of champagne glasses clinking, celebrating a legacy built on lies. I'd been staring at the same coffee mug for an hour, watching the liquid turn from hot to lukewarm to cold. The morning light felt harsh, making everything in my tiny apartment look shabby and tired. Kind of like me. You know those moments when giving up feels like the only sane choice? That's where I was, mentally drafting my surrender speech to the lawyer. What was the point of fighting someone who'd already won? The knock startled me so badly I sloshed cold coffee onto my sweatpants. Nobody visited me here. I barely had furniture yet. For a second, I wondered if Brooke had sent someone to convince me to drop the case. But when I opened the door, there stood Elaine Marshall, her silver-streaked red hair escaping from its clip like it always had. She'd been Mom's best friend since before I was born, and seeing her brought back the scent of Mom's kitchen on Sunday afternoons, coffee and shortbread cookies while they gossiped at the table. Elaine? My voice cracked. What are you going to invite me in, honey? She hefted a heavy-looking file box. My arms aren't as young as they used to be. I stepped aside, watching as she marched straight to my coffee table and set down the box. The label caught my eye. Monsieur Taylor, Estate Backups. Taylor was Mom's maiden name. Your mother, Elaine said, adjusting her vintage glasses, wasn't stupid. She patted the box. And she sure as hell knew her daughters. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, neat folders filled with bank statements, property deeds, and, my heart jumped, trust fund documentation I'd never seen before. Mom kept copies of everything? I sank onto the couch. Margaret was organized down to her bones. Elaine settled beside me, her familiar perfume bringing another wave of Sunday memories. When she got sick, she asked me to hold on to these. Just in case, she said. We both knew what that meant. Brooke. The name tasted bitter. Brooke. Elaine nodded. Your sister's always been predictable in her unpredictability, if you know what I mean. Your mother saw it coming years ago. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside was an identical copy of the codicil I'd found in the quilt, but this one had additional pages. The notary's full contact information, witness statements, a detailed inventory of assets that made my head spin. There's a trust fund? My fingers traced the numbers. I had no idea. Your grandfather set it up for both of you girls. Equal shares. Elaine's voice hardened. Brooke's been accessing hers for years. Yours has been gathering interest. The room felt suddenly warmer, clearer, like a fog lifting. This changes everything, doesn't it? Honey. Elaine reached over and squeezed my hand. This changes everything. That notary, still practicing downtown, those witnesses, still alive and kicking, and these bank records? She tapped the box. They tell quite a story about where money's been moving lately. My eyes burned. Not from tears this time, but from something else. Something that felt like Mom's strength flowing through me. I don't know how to thank you, I whispered. Thank your mother. Elaine stood straightening her blouse. She knew exactly what she was doing when she sewed that page into her quilt. One copy for you to find. One copy safe with me. Check and mate. I looked up at her. Why didn't she just tell me? Because she knew you'd try to fix things with Brooke first. Try to keep the peace. Elaine's smile was gentle but knowing. She wanted you to find your fight on your own. And look, you have. The cold coffee sat forgotten as I spread the documents across my table. Each page felt like a key unlocking a door I hadn't known existed. Mom hadn't just left me half her estate. She'd left me the tools to claim it. I should get going, Elaine said, heading for the door. But Jenna, she turned back. Your mother always said you were the strong one. Brooke just shouts louder. I nodded, already reaching for my phone to call the lawyer. The fire I thought had died last night roared back to life, warming every corner of my soul. You know that moment when you realize the game's been rigged from the start? That's how I felt walking into the courthouse the next morning, armed with Mom's hidden page and Elaine's box of revelations. My lawyer, David Chen, carried the evidence like it was made of glass. The clerk's office smelled like old paper and cheaper coffee. Remember those vintage office supply stores with their rubber stamps and metal filing cabinets? That's what it reminded me of. Except this time, those stamps could change my life. Motion to halt probate certification, David announced, sliding our paperwork across the counter. The clerk's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. This is significant, she murmured. I'll need to notify Judge Taylor immediately. Taylor. The name hit me like a splash of cold water. I'd heard Brooke mention that name at family gatherings, always with that smug little smile of hers. Wait, I touched David's arm. Taylor, as in Richard Taylor? David frowned. Yes, he's handling the probate. Why? He's our cousin, Brooke's godson. You should have seen David's face. He went from concerned to tactical in about 2 seconds flat. That's a mandatory recusal situation. Clear conflict of interest. He turned back to the clerk. We'll be filing an additional motion. The next hour was a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The estate got frozen faster than a January puddle. All assets, all transfers, everything Brooke had tried to grab. But the real fireworks started when the Judicial Ethics Board got involved. I sat in the courthouse hallway, running my fingers over Mom's ring, the one piece of jewelry I'd managed to keep. The marble walls amplified every click of heels, every whispered conversation. A young intern hurried past, then doubled back. Are you Jenna Whitmore? She glanced around nervously. Judge Taylor just recused himself. The case is being reassigned to Judge Martinez. Relief flooded through me. Martinez had a reputation for being tough but fair. No family connections, no social circles overlapping with Brooke's. My phone buzzed. Brooke's name lit up the screen. Voicemail. I hadn't even heard it ring. With shaking fingers, I pressed play and held it to my ear. You think this changes anything? Her voice dripped acid. You really think your little stunt with Mom's paperwork makes a difference? I built something while you were playing nursemaid. I have connections you can't even imagine. So go ahead, wave your precious page around. When this is done, you'll wish you'd taken that music box and disappeared. I looked up to find David watching me, concern etched on his face. Brooke? he asked. I nodded. Save that voicemail, he said. Actually, forward it to me right now. Threatening communications during an active estate dispute? That's not going to play well. My hands shook as I forwarded the message. The courthouse seemed colder suddenly, its grandeur more intimidating. The legal fees were already mounting. I'd had to sell my car just to keep fighting. But looking down at Mom's ring, I remembered her words. Don't let her erase what matters. You okay? David asked, gathering our files. No, I admitted, but I'm still here. He smiled. That's what counts. And Jenna? He tapped the box of records. Your mother left you more ammunition than your sister knows exists. Judge Martinez's clerk just called. They're expediting our hearing due to the previous conflict of interest. The weight of it all pressed down on me. The betrayal, the fight ahead, the money bleeding away. But for the first time since that awful will reading, I felt something else. Hope. Real, solid hope, built on evidence and truth rather than wishes. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Elaine. Just heard about Judge Taylor. Your mother would be proud. Stay strong. I closed my eyes, remembering Mom in her garden, showing me how to tell which plants needed support to grow straight and tall. Sometimes, she'd said, the strongest ones are the ones that bend but don't break. The courthouse doors swung open, and a fresh wave of people rushed in, their lives paused at various legal crossroads. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and grabbed the box that held our truth. Ready? David asked. Ready? The word came out stronger than I expected. You know what they say about karma? Sometimes it doesn't just knock. It kicks the door down. I was having coffee at my favorite corner shop when the first headline popped up on my phone. Local philanthropist under investigation, charity gala funds questioned. There was Brooke's face, not beaming this time, but caught mid-stride trying to dodge reporters outside her office. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the article. The dominoes had started falling faster than I'd imagined. The probate court's fraud investigation had triggered a cascade of scrutiny. Someone had tipped off the Charity Oversight Board about irregularities in the gala's financial reports. Apparently, when you name an event after your dead mother while actively suppressing her real will, people take notice. I couldn't help but remember those endless childhood dinners where Brooke would brag about her latest achievement while I pushed peas around my plate. Mom would always catch my eye and give me this tiny wink, our secret signal that being loud wasn't the same as being right. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. Channel 7 news van outside Brooke's charity office. She tried leaving through the back door, but they caught her. Turn it on. I pulled up the local news stream on my phone. There she was, my perfectly polished sister, her designer blazer slightly askew as she pushed through a crowd of microphones. No comment, she snapped, but they kept pressing. Questions about the estate, about the charity's books, about Mom's will. They all blurred together in a swarm of accusations. You want to know the strangest part? I didn't feel an ounce of satisfaction watching her squirm. Just tired. Tired of the whole ugly dance we'd been doing since we were kids. The next blow came via social media. Marcus, Brooke's high-profile investor husband, had quietly archived every photo of them together. His PR team released a statement about taking time to reflect on personal matters and requesting privacy during this period of separation. The same man who'd smugly handed me that music box at the will reading was now distancing himself from the scandal as fast as his publicist could type. Did you see? Elaine texted again. Marcus moved out of their penthouse last night. His law firm doesn't want the association. I set my phone down and stared out the coffee shop window. Across the street, an elderly woman was carefully tending to window boxes full of the same roses Mom used to grow. The sight hit me harder than any headline. The final court date was 3 weeks away. My lawyer was confident. We had the evidence, the witnesses, even Brooke's threatening voicemail. The estate would likely be split according to Mom's true wishes. But sitting there, watching those roses sway in the autumn breeze, I realized I had no idea what to do with victory. The house where we grew up? Too big for me alone? Too full of shadows? Mom's antique collection? Beautiful, but cold comfort. The trust fund Brooke never knew about? Just money in the end. My phone lit up again. Another news alert. The charity board had suspended operations pending a full audit. They'd frozen the gala accounts. Brooke's carefully constructed image was crumbling like old plaster, revealing all the cracks she'd spent years concealing. A memory surfaced. Mom in her garden, explaining why she let certain plants grow wild while others needed careful tending. Some things need to break down, she'd said, before new life can take root. The barista brought me a refill I hadn't ordered. On the house, she said. You looked like you needed it. I must have been sitting there longer than I realized, lost in thought while my coffee went cold. I pulled out Mom's ring, the one piece I'd managed to keep. In the afternoon light, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Tiny letters engraved inside the band. I had to squint to read them. Grow through what you go through. The words blurred as tears welled up. Even now, Mom was still teaching me. I'd spent so much energy fighting against Brooke's erasure of the past that I hadn't thought about writing the future. If I won, when I won, what would I grow from all this? The question settled over me like morning dew, heavy with possibility. The house, the money, the collections, they weren't just assets to be divided. They were seeds Mom had planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom. I opened my phone's notes app and started typing, ideas for Mom's legacy. The cursor blinked, patient as a garden waiting for spring. The judge's gavel cracked through the courtroom like thunder. The codicil is hereby validated. Estate assets will be divided according to Margaret Taylor's original intentions, with Jennifer Whitmore named as co-beneficiary. My legs went weak. Elaine squeezed my hand as tears spilled down my cheeks. Across the aisle, Brooke's face had gone slack, her perfect makeup unable to hide the shock. She didn't look at me as her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. I barely heard the rest of the ruling through the rushing in my ears. You know those moments that change everything? They never feel quite real when they're happening. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered like moths around a flame. I let my lawyer handle the statements while I slipped away through a side door. The autumn air hit my face, and I took my first deep breath in what felt like months. Need a ride? Elaine asked, appearing beside me with her car keys. I shook my head. I need to walk. My feet carried me to the house. Our house, Mom's house, now partially mine again. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the front door. The emptiness hit me first. No furniture except what had been too heavy to move, no photos on the walls, just dust motes dancing in the afternoon light streaming through bare windows. Remember how houses feel bigger when they're empty? This one seemed to stretch forever, each room an echo chamber of memories. I traced my fingers along the dining room wall where Mom used to mark our heights with pencil marks. The marks were still there, faded but visible. Brooke, 12. Jenna, 8. Climbing up the wall like a ladder to somewhere we'd never reach again. My throat tightened. Winning felt different than I'd imagined. The validation was there, sure, the justice. But it didn't bring back Sunday dinners or Christmas mornings or the sound of Mom humming while she worked in her garden. The garden. I moved through the kitchen to the back door, each step stirring up dust and memories. The handle stuck like it always had. You had to lift and turn at just the right angle. The screen door creaked its familiar song. The backyard stretched out before me, wild and overgrown. Mom's beloved roses had gone feral, climbing the old trellis like they were trying to reach the clouds. Weeds pushed through the stone path she'd laid by hand one summer, the same path where she'd taught me the names of every flower and herb. A garden isn't just plants, she'd told me once, kneeling in the dirt with her wide-brimmed hat casting dappled shadows on her face. It's a sanctuary. A place where broken things can heal. I sank down onto the back steps, overwhelmed by the tangle of emotion and vegetation before me. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It wasn't about beating Brooke or claiming what was rightfully mine. Mom had known that all along, hadn't she? That's why she'd hidden the codicil in that quilt, not just to protect the inheritance, but to make sure I understood what really mattered. The late afternoon sun caught something glinting in the overgrown grass. I walked over and found one of Mom's old garden markers, the kind she used to label her herbs. The text had worn away, but I could still make out the faint impression of her handwriting. A breeze rustled through the neglected garden, carrying the sweet scent of wild roses. For the first time since the funeral, I felt Mom's presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a quiet certainty. She'd known this moment would come. Known I'd be standing here, surrounded by beautiful chaos, trying to figure out what to do next. The garden stretched before me like a blank canvas, waiting to be restored, reimagined, reborn. Not erased or forgotten, but transformed into something new while honoring what came before. Just like Mom had wanted. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the overgrown space. The first step in any garden, Mom always said, was to see what was already growing there, what was worth saving, what needed pruning, and where new life could take root. Standing in that wild garden, I finally understood what she'd meant when she whispered, "Don't let her erase what matters." She wasn't just talking about the will or the house or her possessions. She was talking about legacy, the kind that grows, changes, and creates sanctuary for others. You know what's funny about revenge? Sometimes it leads you somewhere completely unexpected. 3 months after winning the case, I stood in front of a realtor's sold sign on a piece of land just 2 miles from our old house. The property wasn't much to look at yet, just 3 acres of open space with a few old oak trees and a crumbling stone wall. But in my mind, I could already see what it would become. "Are you sure about this?" my lawyer asked when I told him my plans for the inheritance money. "You could buy a nice house, set yourself up." I touched Mom's wedding ring, now permanently at home on my right hand. The familiar weight of it grounded me, reminded me of everything that mattered. Mom always said wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you grow. The construction crews arrived in early spring. I'd sold the family house to a young couple who promised to restore its glory and poured everything into this new project. Every morning, I'd arrive with coffee and watch the foundation take shape, the walls rise, the windows appear like eyes opening to the world. We hit a snag in May when Brooke's appeal landed on my lawyer's desk. She claimed the quilt codicil was suspiciously convenient and demanded a new hearing. I might have panicked once, but now? I just handed the paperwork to our legal team and went back to picking out furniture for the reception area. The ruling came back exactly as we expected. Case closed, previous judgment stands. I heard through the grapevine that Brooke had moved to Arizona, something about a fresh start. Good. Some gardens need space to grow. The center opened on a warm Tuesday in July. I stood in front of the rose-colored brick building, heart pounding as I faced the small crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting. The brass plaque caught the morning sun. The page she forgot, Women's Legal Aid Center. "I'd like to tell you about my mother," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "She taught me that documents aren't just paper, they're promises. Contracts aren't just legal terms, they're protection. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who needs to be heard the most." The first week, 3 women came in. By month's end, we had a waiting list. Our volunteer lawyers, mostly retired attorneys with hearts of gold, worked tirelessly. We helped women navigate divorces, custody battles, estate disputes. Every story different, but the thread was always the same: someone trying to erase what mattered. I set up my office in the back corner, overlooking a small garden we'd planted. Sometimes, between appointments, I'd watch volunteers tending the roses we'd transplanted from Mom's garden. They'd taken root beautifully, climbing the new trellis like they'd always belonged there. One afternoon, a young woman sat across from my desk, twisting her hands in her lap. Her story tumbled out in broken pieces, a brother trying to cut her out of their father's will, claiming she'd abandoned the family by going to college. My fingers went to Mom's ring as I listened. "I have something to show you," I said, opening my desk drawer. I pulled out a framed photograph, the only one I'd kept from the old house. Mom in her garden, wearing that ridiculous sun hat, smiling like she knew a secret. Next to it, I placed the original quilt page that had changed everything. The woman leaned forward, eyes wide. "Is that the page she forgot?" I smiled. "The one that proved sometimes justice is sewn into the quiet places?" "Yeah. And trust me, your father's real wishes are out there too. We just have to know where to look." That's the thing about legacy, isn't it? It's not always in the obvious places. Not in the mansions or the bank accounts or the society galas. Sometimes it's stitched into quilts, buried in garden soil, or hidden in the hearts of those who were always paying attention. I wear Mom's ring every day now. Not as a reminder of what I won, but of what she taught me. That true power isn't about volume or visibility. It's about creating spaces where truth can grow, where what matters stays safe, where the quiet ones can finally speak. And sometimes, when I'm locking up late at night, I swear I can smell Mom's roses drifting in through the open windows. Their scent mingles with fresh coffee and printer ink, legal briefs and hope, the perfect blend of what was and what could be. The morning of our opening ceremony dawned clear and bright. I'd been up since 5, checking and rechecking every detail. You know that feeling when your heart's so full it might burst? That was me, standing in our freshly painted reception area, straightening frames that didn't need straightening. Elaine arrived early, carrying a familiar box. "For the display case," she said, setting it down carefully. Inside were the documents that had changed everything. The quilt page, Mom's original notes, even some old photos I hadn't seen before. My hands trembled as I arranged them in the glass case near the entrance. People started arriving around 10. Local lawyers, community advocates, even a few reporters. Each face reminded me of why we'd created this space. A safe harbor. A place where truth could surface. When Elaine took the podium, her vintage glasses caught the light. "Margaret Taylor was my dearest friend for 40 years, she began, her voice steady but tender. She believed in justice, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. Like the stitches in her favorite quilt, she knew that sometimes the strongest things are hidden in plain sight." My chest tightened. I remembered those long nights when Mom would sit in her favorite chair, that quilt across her lap, telling me stories about the women in our family. Strong women, quiet women, women who kept their power close. When it was my turn to speak, I brought out the quilt itself. We'd had it properly preserved, but you could still see the careful seam where I'd found the codicil. "My mother taught me that documents tell stories," I said, running my fingers along the fabric. "But she also taught me that sometimes the most important stories are the ones we have to look harder to find." I told them about that night I'd discovered the hidden page, about how Mom had somehow known, that Brooke would try to erase me. This center exists because one woman thought ahead, planned carefully, and trusted that truth would find its way out. That's what we want to offer here. A place where your truth matters, where your voice counts, where your story gets told. After the speeches, we led tours through the building, the consultation rooms, each named after women who'd shaped history through quiet resistance, the library, stocked with legal resources and guides. And finally, the garden. I'd saved this part for last. The wooden archway stood at the garden's entrance, hand-carved with Mom's favorite saying, "Grow where you're planted, bloom where you dare." We'd transplanted her roses, adding new varieties in between. Benches nestled among the flowers offered quiet spots for reflection or conversation. Standing under that arch, watching people explore the paths we'd laid, I felt Mom's ring catch the sunlight. It wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was a compass, pointing me toward who I was meant to be. The weight of it felt right, like a promise kept. That's when I noticed her, a young woman standing slightly apart from the crowd, intake forms clutched to her chest. Tears tracked silently down her cheeks as she read through the paperwork. I recognized that look, the mix of fear and hope that comes with finally asking for help. It was like looking in a mirror from 2 years ago. I walked over, careful not to startle her. "Would you like to sit?" I gestured to a nearby bench, partially hidden by Mom's climbing roses, the same ones that used to frame her bedroom window, now offering privacy to someone else who needed shelter. She nodded, and we sat together in the dappled shade. She didn't speak right away, but that was okay. Sometimes silence is the first step toward finding your voice. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses around us, and I watched as her grip on the papers slowly relaxed. Behind us, I could hear Elaine leading another tour group, her voice warm and sure as she explained our services. The sound of life moving forward, of healing beginning, of truth finding its way into the light. In that moment, I felt something settle inside me, like dust motes catching sunlight and finally finding their place to rest. The past wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something useful, something that could help others find their way through their own dark times. Later that afternoon, after most of the guests had left, I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls from Brooke, not that I expected any. The society pages that once featured her weekly charity galas and designer outfits had moved on to fresher faces. Her carefully curated social media account sat dormant, gathering digital dust. You know what's strange? I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Remember how I used to imagine this moment, back when everything was raw and painful? But watching her carefully constructed life crumble didn't bring me joy. It just felt necessary, like pulling weeds so the garden could grow. The last I'd heard, her divorce had finalized quietly. No splashy headlines, no public statements, just a simple legal notice buried in the classifieds. Her charity, the one she'd used to parade Mom's memory around like a designer handbag, dissolved under the weight of audit findings. All those photographs of her cutting ribbons and accepting awards? Gone. Her name appeared exactly once in the final court brief. Defendant Brooke Whitmore Richards. Just another case number in a dusty file. I walked through the center's halls, straightening a few chairs, gathering abandoned programs from the opening ceremony. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The scent of fresh paint still lingered, mixing with the roses drifting in from the garden. A memory hit me then, Mom showing me how to deadhead her roses, her hands gentle but sure. Make the cut clean, she'd say, and new growth will follow. The sharp snip of pruning shears, the sweet earthiness of the soil, the quiet satisfaction in her smile. I hadn't understood then that she wasn't just talking about gardening. Outside, through the rose gate she'd loved so much, the garden glowed in the golden hour light. I let my fingers trail across the petals of the bushes we'd transplanted from her yard. Some had struggled at first, but with care and patience they'd taken root. Now they bloomed more vibrantly than ever. "Ms. Whitmore?" I turned to find a young woman approaching, notepad in hand. She couldn't have been more than 25, with earnest eyes and practical shoes. A small press badge identified her as being from the local paper. I was hoping to get a quote about the center, about what inspired it. Mom's ring caught the light as I adjusted my hair, and I smiled, remembering all the times I'd seen that same gleam on her hand, all the quiet ways she'd prepared for this moment, protecting what mattered most. "You don't have to scream to be remembered," I told her, watching as she quickly jotted down the words. The truth of them settled deep in my bones, solid and sure as the foundation beneath our feet. The reporter looked up, pen poised for more, but sometimes, like Mom always knew, the simplest truths are the ones that echo longest. I just smiled and let the words hang in the air between us, carried on the sweet perfume of roses finding their way home. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.